Bridge to all decks. It is time. Can't believe I'm saying this, Steve Morris. It is time for our Season 2 wrap-up of Star Trek here on Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve. I'm Scott Mantz.
I'm Steve Morris, and I feel the same way. It's with doing the Cinephiles, my other podcast, we will never get to the end. It's an infinite number of movies. In fact, all we get all the time is, why haven't you done this movie? Why haven't you done that movie? Why haven't you done that movie? So it feels really weird that we're 2/3 of the way through the original series.
It really is incredible to think that, when we first started doing this, it just seemed like so far away to wrap my head around, the end of season 1, not to mention the end of season 2. And now here we are at the end of season 2. And it is just so incredible how rewarding this podcast has been, doing these deep dives with you, Steve, seeing the original series in a whole new, fresh light because of the way we've been examining the original Star Trek, which was conceived as an episodic series, but looking at it as a serialized series. And in so many ways, that approach really has worked to the point where you would think that that was the plan all along, which of course it wasn't. And I know we have a whole lot to say about season 2, and that is what we were going to do on this podcast. Now, when we did our season 1 wrap up, we wrapped up season 1 and we did a preview of season 2. So for our season 2 wrap up, we're just going to wrap up season 2, and we're going to save our season 3 preview for our next episode, because we have a lot to say about season 2 and we have a lot to preview about season 3. And I will say this, that doing these deep dives and these conversations and having guests on like Ralph Sinetsky and David Gerald and Walter Koenig, it really has made me see that season 2 has represented the peak of the original Star Trek. And by the time we got to the end of season 2, and now that we're getting into season 3, I see that we are past that peak and things are going to change quite quickly. But for the time being, let's celebrate the achievements of season 2 of Star Trek, starting with on March 9th, 1968, the 15th annual Motion Picture Sound Editors Awards was held. And on the motion picture side, the two winners, there was a tie between Bonnie and Clyde and Dr. Dolittle. Now, I'm going to guess, Steve, for the Cinephiles, you covered one of those movies, but not the other.
Neither, actually. We did not do Bonnie and Clyde. We will never do Dr. Dolittle. What's interesting, it's one of the most interesting years in film history. We've done many movies out of that year, because we've done In the Heat of the Night, which won the Oscar. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, when we did as a tribute to Sidney Poitier. We did The Dirty Dozen, and we did The Graduate. But no, we have not done Bonnie and Clyde. It's exactly what I'm talking about. How could you not have done that movie? We definitely want to. It's a very important film.
Oh, and it's absolutely an important film, and it's tailor-made for the cinephiles. So for everyone listening right now to Enterprise Incidents, if you love movies, then you got to be listening to Steve Morris's other podcast, The Cinephiles. It is a movie lover's haven.
Thank you for the plug. And I realized there's one thing I've never said, which is how it's spelled. So if you were looking for it and you didn't know that it was spelled CINE-FILES, you probably didn't find it. So it's CINE-FILES.
And now you can find it. So on the winner's side for television, finally, Star Trek won something. Star Trek won the award for Best Sound. Now, over for the Emmy nominations, which were announced on April 17th, 1968, Star Trek was nominated for 4 Emmy Awards. For the second year in a row, it was nominated for Outstanding Dramatic Series. And for the second year in a row, it was nominated for Best Supporting Actor in a Drama Series for Leonard Nimoy. It was also nominated for Outstanding Achievement in Film Editing for The Doomsday Machine, which well-deserved nomination there. And it was also nominated for Outstanding Individual Achievement in Special Photographic Effects for the Westheimer Company for my favorite episode, Metamorphosis. So that's very, very cool. So out of those 4 Emmy nominations, Steve, how many do you think Star Trek actually won?
I feel that I should know the answer, but I'm going to say 0.
Yeah, you are correct. Unfortunately, Steve, Star Trek once again came up empty-handed at the Emmy Awards, which were given out on May 19th, 1968. It lost dramatic series for the second year in a row to Mission Impossible, which was also a Desilu show,
And a
uh,
great
and
show.
and a great show for
A great
sure.
show.
And Tom Cruise will definitely agree with that assessment. And Leonard Nimoy lost again, this time to Doc Adams for Gunsmoke. It also lost Outstanding Achievement in Film Editing to the Sights and Sounds episode from Bell Telephone Hour. And it lost the Metamorphosis episode for special photographic effects. I don't know who it lost to. But you know what? Look, I think it's cool that 2 years in a row that Star Trek did get nominated for Best Drama Series. I think that's awesome.
I do too.
And it did not get nominated for season 3. I think we all know why. But Leonard Nimoy did get nominated all 3 years for Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Drama Series. Now, when it came to the episodes that were rerun that summer, not every episode of season 2 made the cut to get the rerun. Can you guess, Steve Morris, which episodes did not make the cut to get a season 2 rerun in the summer of 1968?
Well, if I had been paying attention to the incredible podcast Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve, I probably would know this because I'm pretty sure you said as we went along which ones didn't get it. I
Yeah,
think Patterns of Force might be one that wasn't rerun,
that is
and
correct.
I can't remember what the other ones are.
Okay, the other ones were Friday's Child, which seemed odd that didn't get a rerun because the Klingons were, or a Klingon was in that one. Wolf in the Fold, I can kind of understand that. Obsession, which is a very good episode. It's a shame that didn't get rerun. The best of the episodes that did not get rerun, and it was an episode that really had it all. And to answer a question that we have coming up, an episode that I think really improved after our rewatch and our deep dive, Bread and Circuses.
That's right, because of the
But
network TV stuff.
it is exactly correct, Steve. That is exactly why Bread Circuses did not get rerun, because the execs at NBC felt like it was a satire of NBC. And of course, they were 100% correct. Of course it was.
Yeah.
So listen, Star Trek had been on the bubble since the middle of the first season in terms of like getting canceled. I mean, on a groundbreaking and ambitious show like this, something that had never been done in broadcast television, Star Trek was always on the bubble. They were always in danger of being canceled at the end of season 1. They were in danger of being canceled in the middle of season 2. They were in danger of being canceled. And of course, at the end of season 2, they were in danger of being canceled. And while they were filming Assignment Earth in the beginning of January of 1968, Steve, they had no idea when they broke on that last day of filming on January 10th, whether or not it was goodbye or see you soon. So this leads to what I think is one of the most incredible stories in entertainment history, which is the letter writing campaign that was mounted to save Star Trek for a third season. I mean, it's incredible, Steve. Now that we have social media and we have the internet, it is so easy to reach anyone you want to across the world at the push of a button. But back in 1967 and 1968, you had to do this thing where you take a piece of paper and you fold it, right? So it fits in this thing called an envelope, and you had to lick the back of this thing called a stamp. And, it was a process, and it was a process that actually started in October of 1967, when the most valid rumors up to that point had already started making the rounds that Star Trek was going to be canceled. Now, Steve, are you familiar with the name Bijou Trimble?
I am. Yes, she's one of the key founders of the letter writing campaign, right?
Absolutely, that's correct. So Bijou Trimble and her husband John Trimble had met Gene Roddenberry at a science fiction convention the week before Star Trek premiered back in 1966. It was a science fiction convention. They met and befriended Roddenberry. They became frequent guests to the set, worked for Roddenberry as sort of as an assistant in some ways, and they basically mounted this letter writing campaign to save Star Trek for a third season. And at its peak, NBC said it got 6,000 letters a week, topping
Oh,
out at more than 200,000 letters. That's actually a conservative estimate. It was actually much, much more than that. And ads were placed in fanzines, which first made the rounds in 1967. There was a fanzine called Spockanalia, a fanzine called Vulcanalia, a fanzine called Plactow, and the official Star Trek newsletter called Inside Star Trek. Gene Roddenberry personally paid for the printing of bumper stickers that said Star Trek lives, Spock for president, and of course, I grok Spock. And as you pointed out recently during the what was going on in the world during the filming of these
right.
episodes, on January 6th, during the filming of Assignment Earth, about 1,000 protesters marched on the NBC lot to protest and save Star Trek. So finally, on March 1st, 1968, NBC caved to the pressure, threw up their hands, and surrendered. They surrendered with an on air announcement that came at the end of the first run of the episode, The Omega Glory. And this is what the voice of NBC said. Quote, and now an announcement of interest to all viewers of Star Trek. We are pleased to tell you that Star Trek will continue to be seen on NBC television. We know that you will be looking forward to seeing the Wiggly adventure in space on Star Trek. So
Wow.
can you imagine, like, you don't know like what's going to happen to your favorite show, and you're watching the Omega Glory, and then during the ending credits, which you're just watching for whatever reason, because of course the ending credits are really cool with the photos from the other episodes, and you hear that announcement. I mean, in 1968, that was just unprecedented that had been made.
It's so bizarre, and just to contrast it with today, I mean, what you said is totally true. Our ability to communicate is so much greater. We also find out stuff so much faster. So today, that would have been on all over Twitter. It would people have been asking the question. We would have known about it. The other thing I find really fascinating is, again, today fans are so powerful. In my opinion, too powerful.
Oh,
That
yeah.
studios are constantly looking at social media and seeing how there was, like, we have the announcement about a trailer is going to come out, and then everyone is hovering around social media to see what kind of engagement the trailer makes, and then they're going back and recutting the film based on the expectations of the fans. That's nuts. What's amazing to me is that I don't think there's any other time in history up to this point. It's not that fans didn't write in letters, and it's not that they didn't have influence, and it's not that studios didn't pay attention. But I don't think there's anything like this up to this point where
Absolutely.
fans really did dictate a clear multi-million-dollar decision on the part of a studio. And the thing that I really wonder about is, not to diminish any of the hard work of all these fans who did it, but the fact that Roddenberry was there, how much did he start this?
Well, that's a great question. Officially, he really kind of sort of kept his distance from the Trimbles while they were doing this, even though the Trimbles were basically working for Roddenberry. But in terms
Yeah,
of it, but in terms, Steve, I mean, listen, that is a great question, and you are correct to be skeptical of Roddenberry's claim that he didn't really have anything to do with the campaign. I mean, of course he did. If the Trimbles are working for him, of course he knew about it. Of course he had something to do with it. Of course he was advising them on what to do. He just, in an official capacity, he had to make sure there was no paper trail back to him.
right.
Okay.
And it's not that the enthusiasm wasn't genuine. Obviously, if there weren't hundreds of thousands of people that wanted to save Star Trek, it doesn't matter how hard Roddenberry pushed, it wouldn't work.
See, what's amazing, like you said, Steve, is that nothing like this had ever been done up to
Yeah.
that point in the late 1960s. That a network caved to the pressure from the fans to continue a series for a third season. So, with all of that support, you would think that the network would be like, we've got something really great on our hands here. We've been wrong all along about putting it on Friday nights at 8:30. We got to give it a great time slot. And we got to really take care of the show and make sure that it gets the right time slot to reach the biggest possible audience, because this is a very, very popular show it's getting a lot of fan mail, and we have to really do right by it. We have to do right by its producer, Gene Roddenberry, who at that point, by the time the announcement was finally made, of course, that boosted his spirits. And he was really sort of leaning into coming back to the show as the showrunner, not just the executive producer, and also really having a hand in writing scripts and in picking scripts from established writers like Gene Kuhn and Dorothy Fontana. But of course, and this is what we're going to say for our season 3 preview, none of that happened.
Right.
And NBC was really, after all that, all they wanted to do was kill Star Trek for good. And they did everything they could to do that. And in spite of that, I'm going to say this now, Steve, that season 3, while the worst of the 3 seasons, still had some damn fine episodes in spite of everything that was working against it. But meanwhile, my question for you, Steve, is after our deep dive of season 2 here on Enterprise Incidents, what do you think?
Of season 2?
Yeah.
I think this really is peak Star Trek. It's not, and I love the first season. I raved about so many of the episodes of the first season, but the run, particularly in the middle of season 2, around Doomsday Machine and Mirror Mirror and all those, it's just really, to use your term, has hit its stride.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it really is solid. And I did have a weird bit of sadness, because I went, oh, this is the peak. I'm never going to quite get here again. And I agree with you. There are a bunch of episodes in the 3rd season that I really like, and I'm looking forward to talking about them, but we're never going to have that kind of run as you do in season 2. That's the peak.
When we covered Journey to Babel, and I really that to me is the end of the peak, because in terms of production order, Journey to Babel was the episode. It was the last of the really top tier, absolute classic, iconic, groundbreaking, crucial episodes. I mean, of course, Spock's parents and Mark Leonard as and Jane Wyatt. I mean, that was an episode that really had it all. So when we got to that point in our deep dive in production order, like that is where the sadness hit for me, where I went, it's never going to get as good as this. It's still going to be very, very good for the rest of season 2. And there are great episodes towards the end of season 2, like The Ultimate Computer, I think is a great episode. But it was really like when we got to like Omega Glory and Assignment Earth, which are 2 episodes that I think I like, especially with regards to Omega Glory more than a lot of people. But no, it's the days of Sitting on the Edge from season 1 and Devil in the Dark from season 1, Errant Mercy, This Side of Paradise, and then season 2 with Mock Time, like the episodes you said, and of course my favorite, Metamorphosis. Those days are in the past, and that is sad. That's the thing. That's the tragic thing about the story of the original series, Steve, is that you see, and we covered all of this. We've seen the rise of Star Trek. We've seen them find their way. We have seen them hit their stride, and now, starting with season 3, we are going to see that stride really taper off to a really, really sad and heartbreaking conclusion. But I agree with you. I've always said that season 2 was not just the best season of the original series, but I think season 2 of Star Trek is the greatest season of any Star Trek series over its entire run since 1966. And I just, of course, I feel like it hit its stride, but it in terms of the quality, in terms of the pacing, in terms of the actors really getting a great hold on their characters, it doesn't get better than season 2. But, Steve, I did have an epiphany due to our special guest on our deep dive of The Trouble with Tribbles.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. So while we were talking, and David Jarrell was an absolutely fantastic guest, just so much energy, so much information. He really just that was like one of my favorite conversations. But he said something that I was hearing him while he said it, but it stayed with me. It stayed with me. And he said that even though season 2 was a great season, it didn't have the gravitas of the first season. And like when I, but and I thought a lot about it, and I think he's right in terms. Like look at some of those first season episodes, like Enemy Within, and Devil in the Dark, Errand of Mercy, This Side of Paradise. I mean, there's a little humor in some of these episodes, especially Tomorrow Was Yesterday, and of course Squire of Gothos, but it was still a serious show. So as much as Gene Coon brought so much to the end of season one and the first half of season two, the humor did take away some of that gravitas. I Mud, Trouble with Tribbles, and even though it was filmed after he left, he still did write a piece of the action. And he's, it's like sacrificing the gravitas for the strength in so many other ways. Was it worth it? The Star Trek season two lose something in effect by Gene Coon's involvement? Overall, I'm going to say no, but those words from David Gerald really did make me think.
So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Like, I don't think we need to say that the humor got rid of the gravitas, because because I actually think Spock and Kirk are very funny in City on the Edge of Forever. Like the ability to have some humor. And one of the things we talked about throughout Star Trek is its ability to shift tones is really powerful. Yep. I just think they chose not to go there. Like, I think there's no reason to me that an episode like Balance of Terror can't happen next to an episode like Piece of the Action. That's totally fine with me. I don't think they had the desire to do the heavy episode anymore.
Right.
In the same way that they did in the first season. Where No Man Has Gone Before is heavy. It deals with heavy stuff. Mm-hmm. And I don't think they go there quite as much. It's not, to me, it's not that the humor comes in and replaces it. It's that they just chose not to do that kind of an episode. And I really do think, as much as I am critical of Gene Roddenberry for a lot of things, I do think this was one of Gene Roddenberry's strengths, was wanting to engage in those kinds of ideas.
Well, I agree 100%. It just, when Gerald made that comment about the gravitas, it did give me a lot of food for thought. I still think that season two is the best of the three and the best of every season. And it was just, another perspective from someone who actually was there and worked on the show, which is another reason why it gave me really a lot to think about. And I would love to know from everyone listening if you think that Star Trek season two lost some of its strength because of the injection of a little too much humor. Go to our Facebook page and let us know what you think. How do you think Star Trek really evolved as it got into season two?
I think the biggest thing is that it's in season two that they become a family. That's the big one for me. It's that we see the building of those relationships in season one, and certainly we see the great chemistry between Kirk and Spock. But it's an episode like Amok Time where you really see the real creation of these three friends, that these are each other's best friends. And I also think the addition of Chekhov and episodes like Mirror Mirror, where you kind of see the ensemble and the emergence of Scotty, like all of those things make you feel like, oh, this is a group that works together, rather than a TV show with a star and a bunch of other people that kind of show up. That's the biggest one to me, is the crew of the Enterprise as a family.
I couldn't agree more. I really felt that there were more episodes in season two that really were ensemble shows where you really did feel like a family. And even though the opening credits in season two, now you have the addition of DeForest Kelley with Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner. But in episodes like Who Mourns for Adonais, Mirror Mirror, The Doomsday Machine, Friday's Child, like you really get, like, obviously the addition of Chekhov, and Scotty really, really stepped up to the plate, sort of teasing the answer to another question that we have coming up. But I agree with you. I think that the evolution, and this all comes with the actors finding their footing with their characters, the writers really hitting their stride with writing for the show, Dorothy Fontana and Gene Coon especially, but also Steve, what helped Star Trek season two really be the peak was that you were using the very best directors on a rotating basis the very best directors that ever worked on Star Trek. You had Joseph Pevney, you had Mark Daniels, you had Ralph Sinetsky, you had Vincent McAveety, and of course, John Meredith Lucas, who became the showrunner for the last 9 episodes. And I think that really is why Star Trek evolved in all the right ways. You had the comedy, of course, you have full on comedy episodes, which worked. And you just had this dynamic and this ensemble and this family feel that really, like, that's the year. That's the peak.
I think the other thing that happens and a lot of this is probably Gene Kuhn, is more and more we're solidifying the world that exists around us, or the galaxy that exists around us. More and more we're locking in, this is what Starfleet really is. This is what the Federation really is. This is what the Klingons are. This is kind of, so all of that, which was sort of amorphous, and we were kind of, what exactly does the Enterprise do in season 1? It's a little vague. And now it's sort of locked in. We sort of have a real sense of how this thing works. I think that really emerges in season 2.
But do you think that the emergence, certainly, well, maybe not the emergence, that's probably the wrong word, but the increased use of the Prime Directive as a plot device, do you think that was a good idea?
I think theoretically the Prime Directive is a great idea, and I really think they didn't know what they were getting into.
Yeah.
I really think they said it, and then they just kind of ignored it when we want to ignore it, bend it when we want to bend it, adhere to it when we want to adhere to it, and not question what is the basic idea. Why have a Prime Directive? And I think if they had done more of that thing, because I actually think there was so much more. I think what happened in Star Trek, not that I don't like the episodes in the original series, is that they just violated it all the time. So
Yeah.
it became sort of meaningless. And then later on, they'd adhere to it, like in Next Generation, to the most ridiculous and stupid degree, rather than engaging in what is this idea about? And to me, the idea is it's about not being arrogant. Because in our world, it's how do we relate this to our world? To me, in our world, there have been the powerful countries who have thought they knew what was best for all the other countries and all the other people, and we labeled people as savages, and we made sure that they got our religion, and we wanted them to use and that stuff wasn't all that cool. And it was in the 60s that we really started to figure out, hey, maybe civilizing all of Africa wasn't really such a nice thing to do. And maybe they knew some stuff that we didn't know, and maybe we should be a little more cautious. That's the first thing. And the second thing is our ability to predict what's going to happen because of our interference. And of course, the show's in the middle of Vietnam, and we thought that was going to be a really easy war, and it really wasn't. And it went in a lot of different ways. And it was not only destructive, hugely destructive in Vietnam, with 3 million Vietnamese dead and 50,000 Americans dead, but it was hugely destructive to the structure of America. And so going like, we shouldn't necessarily jump in with both feet and think we know what we're doing. I think that's a great thing to be discussing. And that to me is the core of the Prime Directive. But they didn't really engage in that. And then they just had Kirk. Well, Kirk can just fix a planet, And so I think it was a brilliant, brilliant idea. And I think up to this day, they still have not really locked down how best to use the Prime Directive.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that what you said was right on point and very articulate. Certainly, that answer was thought through much, much more and much better than the concept of the Prime Directive itself when they came up with it. Gene Kuhn came up with it back in 66, 67. I think the Prime Directive was created with the very, very best of intentions. On paper, it is something that is absolutely essential to the Federation as they go out and explore strange new worlds without getting too tied up with them. So my question for you, Steve, is out of the second season episodes that we saw, which episode do you think is the best, for lack of a better term for it, the best Prime Directive episode?
Oh, that is an interesting question. I'm going to give you what I think will be a shocking answer. In terms of really engaging in these ideas, it's not one of my favorite episodes, but is A Private Little War.
Okay.
A Private Little War is the episode that most actually engages in the idea of what are the consequences with interfering with another planet, and should we
Mm,
do it or should we not? And really presenting this is not an easy answer. You know, there are other episodes where I feel Kirk made the wrong choice, like the apple, and there are other episodes where I feel he made the absolute right choice, like Return of the Archons. But those don't engage as much in actually the issues of should we interfere,
right.
and Private Little War does.
Well,
How about you?
my answer is different from yours. I actually do agree with your choice of A Private Little War, and I agree with why you chose it. My favorite of the Prime Directive episodes is actually Bread and Circuses because of everything they did to not
Right.
interfere and to not engage, even to the point where Kirk tells Scotty condition green, which is his way of saying, hey, we're okay, we're in trouble, but it's not immediate. Stay out of it. Don't do anything to
That's a
interfere.
great point. Yeah.
And I just think that watching Kirk and Bread and Circuses do everything in his power to stay out of it, to not interfere, to the point where by the end of the episode, in terms of the society of the planet, Kirk and Spock and McCoy really didn't interfere at all. They didn't get anything done. They didn't change anything. They're still going to have the gladiatorial games on TV and so on. So I think that's a great example of the Prime Directive in terms of enforcing it and
Right.
really, really not interfering at all. And I just think overall that episode is great.
What do you think are the consequences of Gene Kuhn leaving? What was lost?
Steve, that's a loaded question. That is a loaded
I've been
question.
working on it.
I just think that I just have so many times where I think to myself, what if Gene Kuhn stayed on as the showrunner for Star Trek? What would the rest of season 2 really have been like? Now, keep in mind that even after he left, most of the scripts that were put into production by his successor, John Lucas, were scripts that Kuhn did rewrites on, that he made changes on, suggested changes on, or in one case in particular, a piece of the action just wrote because he was allowed to do his comedy episode one final time with the gangster episode. But if he had really stayed on as the showrunner for the rest of the season, not to take anything away from John Lucas, because I thought he did a good job, but if he had stayed on as the showrunner, Steve, can you imagine what season 3 would have been like if Gene Kuhn was the showrunner producer of Star Trek? We would probably have gotten a season 4 because NBC would not have had to deal with Roddenberry. They would have dealt with Kuhn. And NBC, the network, they had problems with Roddenberry. And that was one of the reasons why they were intent on burying Star Trek. It is such an interesting question. Like, what if Gene Kuhn had stayed? Man, I mean, look, I'm glad that he was there for as long as he was, but damn.
I had never even considered the political aspects of it, that the relationship with the network would have been different and therefore season 3 would have been different. I'd never considered that. That is a really interesting one to think about. I think we need to be careful not to he's not perfect. He didn't do everything perfectly. And my guess is from what I've heard about his workload at the time, he might have just burnt out if he had stayed on. That's one thing. But I think the big thing for me is the shows were tighter. They were just tighter. And a lot of that is those last rewrites, is that even some of the shows that we know he touched the script, sometimes it's those rewrites on the day or week, in the days right before. And it's the pressure to really one of there's two sort of tensions in creating things. And one is at a certain point you have to let it go. And that can be really, really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to learn that lesson of like, it's a job. I do the best I can and then I let it go. And then the other lesson is not good enough. There's a point where you can't let it go out until you feel that it is good enough to go out. And I feel like particularly near the end of season 2 and obviously in season 3, there's a lot of like, well, we just got to get a show out,
There was a lot of that, Steve. That's a great
Yeah.
point. That is a really great point because when John Meredith Lucas took over after Gene Kuhn left, not only is he taken over, I mean, look, he had been there a little because he wrote The Changeling, and so
Right.
he had his sort of foot in the pool, But when it came to being a showrunner, being a producer, not only did he have to take over from Kuhn, but Lucas took over from Kuhn at a time when it was like after 16 episodes, are we going to get renewed? Well, we're going to pick up another few. Well, what about after that? Well, let's pick up another couple more, and and that meant always having to have scripts ready to go into production if they got the green light for the rest of the second season. So what you're describing, Steve, is exactly what happened under Lucas's watch. But if Kuhn had just been there and stayed on, yeah, I mean, he definitely, according to him, and according to other people who were there, like Bob Justman and even David Gerald, Kuhn was definitely exhausted and burned out. But he was also butting heads with Roddenberry after Kuhn took the show in a more comedic direction. And Roddenberry didn't like that. They had a falling out. Kuhn left. And you could see, and we talked about this, Steve, that by the end of the second season, Roddenberry's name is in a lot more scripts, and not often for the better, because some of those scripts got very heavy handed. But Roddenberry was intent on taking back the show that he lost a hold of when Gene Kuhn was producing it.
You know what the interesting things that people don't really, some people who don't work in the creative world understand. We always have the image of like the great creator, the genius, that's the
Yeah,
person
yeah.
who made it.
Mhm.
And frequently, that genius, not saying they're not a genius, needs other people to push back against them. That is George Lucas a genius, and is he responsible for creating Star Wars? Absolutely. Was the first edit a total mess? Were there lots of problems with the script that led people like Carrie Fisher and Harrison Ford to improvise new dialogue in order to make that thing better? Yes. And most importantly, Marsha Lucas coming in and re-editing things, and John Williams coming in and making things make sense with an amazing score.
Yep.
That's how you get that movie. And so I actually think the tension between Gene Kuhn and Gene Roddenberry probably is responsible for some of the best Star Trek. Is
Sure.
that it's not Gene Roddenberry being ascended, and it's not Gene Kuhn getting to do anything he wants to do. It's that they had to compromise, because, and I've had this experience too, where I've written a thing or made a film and gone, this is the best thing ever, it's perfect. And then I send it out, and then people rip it to pieces, and I'm angry and upset and go, they don't understand me. They don't get it. Like, what terrible people, they're jerks. Then I can't sleep. I'm up all night. And the next day I get up and make the thing better.
Right.
And that happens all the time.
But it's also interesting that with Gene Kuhn, two of the scripts that he wrote that his name was on, Solo, Devil in the Dark, and Metamorphosis, are I think they're the only two episodes of Star Trek where the credited writer was the only person who developed, right, who touched it. I mean, like, you had advice from Bob Justman and Dorothy Fontana and certainly Stan Robertson over at NBC, but in terms of the name on the rewrites and the new outlines and the revisions and the new drafts, Kuhn's name is the only one on those two scripts, and they went from outline to final draft teleplay in 4 or 5 weeks, very, very quickly. So, but no, man, in a parallel universe, Steve, Gene Kuhn stayed on Star Trek, and it ran for 5 years, the 5-year
Yep.
bit.
And then there would have been no movie, no other
Yeah.
series, because also I think it's like part of what makes Bruce Lee or James Dean legends is that they died.
Yeah.
Is that if they go on, then they aren't the same kind of legend. If Star Trek goes on and has a good 5-year run, maybe we're not here. Maybe you and I are not sitting here today.
That's very possible. And listen, I think you're absolutely right. I think that the story of its short run and the myth that it was a disaster in the ratings when it actually did pretty solid numbers, but the fact that it went away after 1969 and then it shows up in this thing called syndication, and people like you and me, which I am proud that you and I and so many of our listeners on Enterprise Incidents are members of the syndication generation that discovered Star Trek 5 nights a week on UHF, made it very, very popular in order for Star Trek to lead to all the new shows and all the new movies that followed. But would that have happened if Gene Kuhn had
Who
stayed
knows?
on?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah. So here, I've got some questions for you.
Let's hear it.
Which character of the main cast surprised you the most in season 2? Who emerged in a way or showed you something you didn't expect?
Wow, that is a great question, Steve. And the answer I have to that is an answer that came to me when we were early in our season 2 deep dive conversations of Star Trek on Enterprise incidents. And that character, the one who surprised me the most, is Scotty.
Mm.
Scotty is the man. He's the man. Not only did he save the day in like Friday's Child and Bread Circuses, but look at how he did it. Look at the way he ran that bridge in Friday's Child when he answered the distress call, which wound up being fake. And he's like going back to the planet Capella and he gets another distress call. And he's like telling Uhura, ignore it. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And then in Bread and Circuses, when he's on the bridge and he says, Condition Green says, I can't interfere, but that doesn't mean I can't show this planet what the power of a starship really can do. And he's like, and Jimmy Doohan is just so fantastic. He just crushed it. What is your answer to this question?
Well, first of all, I love yours, and I think that what's so interesting is that it seems to me such a case of the writers realizing who this actor is and what he's capable of, because he is just Scotty is so well defined. Of the not big three, he's the one we have the clearest sense of really who this guy is. I think he's
for
great.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
For me, it's just Chekhov stepping in and just instantly being part of the family. That's really impressive to me, because there's no reason why he's not another crew guest star. Like we've had tons of them that shows up for 1 or 2 episodes and we never hear of them again. You know, like LaSalle or something. DeSalle. Yeah. You know, like, but he shows up and he's like, oh, he's one of the team right away.
And that's a great point too, Steve, because Walter Koenig made such an impression with his performance as Chekhov in just 2 seasons of Star Trek. It feels like he was there for all 3. I mean, like when I think of the first season of Star Trek, I don't think of it as, oh, that's the one that Chekhov wasn't there for.
Right.
I just think of Chekhov as being a part of Star Trek, and I don't divide it to, oh, well, it's just season 2 or 3. You're absolutely right.
Which character would you think was most underutilized?
I gotta say, Uhura. Uhura. I mean, she had some good moments. She was part of the landing party in Gangsters of Triskelion. She really crushed it in Mirror Mirror. But I just wish that they had used her more. And I know we brought this up when we were talking to Ralph Sinetsky about Return to Tomorrow. And, having Dr. Ann Mulhall take the life force of Thalassa, she was fantastic. But wouldn't it have been great to have Nichelle Nichols as Uhura play that role? That would have been fantastic. That's something that Dorothy Fontana really tried to do when some of these scripts came in from other writers and they had some of these crew members who we never saw before. She's like, well, why don't we just have Sulu do this? Or why don't we have Chekhov do this? Or why don't we have McCoy do that? And I just wish that someone had been vocal and said, we're not using Nichelle Nichols enough. She's fantastic. How about you?
So I would not say in season 1 she's without question the most underutilized. In season 2 she does, as you said, she has a bunch of really good moments. I'm thinking about Return to Tomorrow with Uhura in the part, and it's like you think about controversy around the first interracial kiss for Plato's stepchildren. That's just one kiss where they're being forced to do it. This would be a relationship, where it's true love. I don't know if it would have been, that would have been amazing, but
that would have been awesome.
But I don't think you could get away with it. I don't think they would. I don't think the network would ever have let that happen. But I think my most underutilized character is, and it isn't because he was off shooting a movie with John Wayne for 8 episodes, but it's Sulu. Because if you look at the first 7 or 8 episodes of Star Trek in the first season, he's a really big character. He's a bigger character than Scotty is. And in the second season, with the exception of Mirror Mirror and a couple of other moments, he has almost nothing to do.
I agree. Yeah. I agree. I think, well, listen, if he had not gone off and missed 10 episodes, and that's, 10 episodes out of the 26 that were shot for season 2, he missed, that was supposed to be him on Triskelion with Kirk and Uhura. in Games of the Triskelion, but he wasn't back. That shoot got delayed in Georgia because the weather was terrible. And he missed a really good, that would have been a really great role. And yeah, you're right. In the first season, Sulu was an excellent, excellent character. And you're right. I mean, next to her, he is definitely the most underutilized. But Steve, who is your favorite guest starring performance on season 2 of Star Trek?
So, first of all, this is a really tough question because there are so many great ones. And I'm going to separate this answer into two because you asked who is my favorite performance. And my favorite performance is William Wyndham in Doomsday Machine. I think his performance is the layers of it, the intensity of it, the strength of it, the sadness of it, the vulnerability of it, the insanity of it. I think he totally makes that show. And it's a great show, top to bottom anyway. So his is my favorite performance. My favorite character that was introduced is Sarek.
Okay, great.
Mark Leonard. Also a great performance. But in terms of an addition to Star Trek and as a character I absolutely adore, despite the fact he's barely ever shows up, I think Sarek is a huge, huge addition. How about you?
I think Sarek is fantastic. And I'm thrilled that we got to see Mark Leonard reprise that character in some of the original series movies. But, okay, to answer your first answer, to follow up on that, William Wyndham, I mean, come on. He's the Citizen Kane of guest stars in season 2 of Star Trek. His performance as Decker, as Ahab, I mean, it's just so great. And the tension between Decker and Spock is fantastic. And the tension between Decker and Kirk isn't even on the Enterprise. And you could just feel that tension between Decker and Kirk, just their butting heads through their communicators. It's really, really fantastic. I think the best character, antagonist, and the best performance next to William Wyndham is Michael Forrest as Apollo. Because it was during our conversation on Who Mourns for Adonais that I realized Apollo is not a bad guy. He is a sad God. He is a sad being. He is longing for acceptance. He is longing for purpose, and he is longing for affection. And he is longing for them so strongly that he's going to force Kirk and the crew at the Enterprise to give it to him. And that final scene when he says, take me, and he disappears, it is so heartbreaking. It is so heartbreaking. The other performance I really, really like a lot, and I've always said this, one of the most underrated guest stars in all of Star Trek is Eleanor Donahue from Metamorphosis, just because the range that the actress has to go to from the beginning as Hedford when she's very, very tough to when she completely breaks down, realizing she squandered her life, to this elegant beauty, this innocence that she displays when she's resurrected as the companion. This is all in just 50-minute episode, and she's lovely. She's absolutely lovely. And one final honorable mention: William Marshall as Daystrom in The Ultimate Computer. Excellent performance.
There really are a lot of great guest stars throughout season 2. A lot of really good actors come in. Well, and maybe I already have your answer to this. Does that mean Apollo is your favorite antagonist in season 2?
One of them. One of them.
Yes.
Apollo is definitely one of my favorite antagonists. The other antagonist that really just like went way up there for me, Steve, and this is because of the revelation I had about this character from talking with you on Enterprise Incidents and also talking to director Ralph Sinetsky, is Proconsul Claudius Marcus from Bread and Circuses. Right? Logan Ramsey was so good in that role. He was like a mustache twirling baddie who makes no apologies for who he is steadfast in his belief that he is doing what he has been bred to by the society that he was raised in, this true parallel world from, Hodgkin's law of parallel worlds, whatever. But, but Logan Ramsey, I thought, was absolutely fantastic. And that was a big revelation for me from doing Enterprise Incidents with you.
What's interesting is with him, with Apollo, they really show one of the things that I love about Star Trek that I learned from Star Trek is these are not evil characters. They are not doing things simply because they are bad guys. They are doing things out of motivations of what their character needs, what their value system is. So that's one of the things I really like. Here are my two favorite antagonists. The first one, and it really was on our rewatch that I went, oh my God, this might be the most evil move of anybody in Star Trek, at least that we've seen so far. And that is T'Pring. Man, what she
Oh,
does, her
yeah.
move to basically, have her fiance either murder his best friend or be killed himself so she can get what she wants. That's an evil move. In a contrast to what I said, although she is doing it entirely out of self-interest. But that is not my favorite antagonist. My favorite antagonist is Mirror Spock.
Ooh, oh man, that is a great choice. Let's hear it.
I mean, he is it's awesome. I mean, it's so much fun to watch Nimoy play the part, and he's genuinely scary. He's genuinely like, oh, I would not want to be up against this person. I put Mirror Spock up against Khan. I put Mirror Spock up against any bad guy in all of Star Trek. That is a dangerous dude who
That
I
is
still really like,
You really like him because, like Kirk himself said, he is very much like our own Mr. Spock, isn't he? And
Mm-hmm.
and we talked about this during our epic deep dive of Mirror Mirror about the brilliance of Leonard Nimoy's performance. About I think you really raised a really great question during that conversation. Is did he get to be that way because of the society he was in? I mean, it was really, really an incredible conversation on that episode, Mirror Mirror. And as for T'Pring, that is also an excellent choice. She was so calculating. She was evil, but as Spock himself said, she was flawlessly logical.
Yep. What episode surprised you the most?
Steve, two episodes surprised me the most in terms of having a new appreciation for them. One of them is Bread and Circuses
Mm-hmm.
because it is an episode that when it aired as the second to the last episode, it was dumped there because NBC didn't like that it was a spoof of NBC
Right.
or a satire of NBC, and it has held up today where it gains new relevance because of reality television. But this episode has it all. It has drama, conflict, great guest star performances, a real edge of your seat moment at the very end when they beam out of the jail cell at the last moment.
Mm-hmm.
It is, and having Ralph Sinetsky on to talk about it, talking about those scenes and the scene in the cell with Kirk, with Spock and McCoy. I mean, there is so much packed into this 50-minute episode. It's really, really staggering. But the other episode that really I've always liked, but really went way up in a surprising way to answer your question was the Deadly Years.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we were talking about that with our guest Jim Brooks that day, and here we are, we're middle age, and this is an episode that I certainly liked it when I was a little kid, into my teens and in my college years, and so on and beyond that. But as a middle aged man in my 50s now, it has resonated in completely different ways because we care about these characters. We care about Kirk and Spock and McCoy and Scotty so very much. It hurts to see people we care about, i.e., family members that have gone through this, to suffer. And that is what makes the episode so powerful. It's a really personal episode, and watching Kirk deal with his failing memory and it's and just lose their physical bearings as well. It hit me in a much more powerful emotional way than it ever had. What is your the episode that have really surprised you?
So Deadly Years is a great answer. That's probably my second. It really, because I didn't expect to be moved.
Right.
And that's really what was surprising to me. For me, the most surprising episode I always liked, always thought was a great episode of Star Trek. But through studying it, I went, man, the direction in this episode is next level. And there's so much more here in terms of relationships than I really had seen until I studied it closely. And that's Journey to Babel. Is Journey to Babel, it's beautifully shot. There's the camera is put in places in different ways from anything else in Star Trek. The production value, because there's so many extras, there's so much going on in it. And then, man, the more I think about Sarek and Spock and Amanda, the more those characters get deep and complicated and conflicted and hypocritical and prideful. I mean, it is that episode proves more than anything else that the idea that Vulcans don't have emotions is BS. Is that episode is so filled with emotions, it's all being held down. That's what really surprised me the most.
Was there an episode that after our deep dive that you had a further thought on, either because you watched the episode again after the conversation or because of something that you read online, on Facebook or Twitter or on our Apple podcast page with the reviews, that made you go, "Oh, I wish we had talked about that," or that thing that you read actually made you feel differently about the scope of the conversation?
That's a good question. I think in general, I don't read very much because I want it to be just what you and I think.
Mm-hmm.
But the one that I did read about, because I will always be trying to get to the bottom of this, is Private Little War. Does Kirk send down the flintlocks or does he not? What is the final decision? Because, and I know you believe that he does, and certainly there's evidence for that, but there's also evidence that he's saying no, and there's evidence that it's just left ambiguous. And so that's the one where, and it's so funny because I don't love the episode, for all the reasons we talked about.
Yeah.
But I can't stop thinking about, what was this about? What does this say? What does it all mean? It's you know what it is? It's the most 70s film of this 60s TV show because it's filled with so much ambiguity and the characters are so conflicted. And Kirk, our hero, his motivations are so hard to figure out. That it's leaves you in this well, how am I supposed to feel about this?
Yeah. Now, what's funny, Steve, is that all these years of watching A Private Little War, it never occurred to me that he didn't arm the Hill people with flintlocks. I just thought, oh, he's using the word serpents instead of the actual word flintlocks because of the flintlocks represent the serpents taking them out of the Garden of Eden. So it just never occurred to me that he didn't. But you know what? You make a great argument, and other people have made a great argument. Maybe he did not send the flintlocks down, and that we will never know. And if we're talking about it and going back and forth either way, I think that's actually really, really cool.
Well, I'll give you here. I have for this whole time I've been trying to figure out, since we did the thing, I've been trying to figure out a good metaphor. Let's say that we were talking about whether or not to send tequila shots to the kindergarten class.
Okay.
And I said, all right, Scott, I guess, and for all these reasons we have to do. And I say, okay, Scott, I want you to send down 50 tequila shots to the kindergarten class. And you say, I'm sorry, what did you say? What did you say you want me to do? And then I realized that that's a bad idea. And I go, 50 doses of poison.
I get it. I hear you.
You know,
I understand. I understand completely why that moment is more ambiguous than I've certainly given it credit for all these decades. But there were two episodes in particular for me where there was something that I read, because I do read all the comments on Facebook and Apple Podcasts, and one of them was regarding the Omega Glory. Now, we talked about Omega Glory. There are great moments in that episode, but the whole is less than the sum of the parts. The last act does jump the shark when they bring in the American flag and so on. But there was one comment that I read about the Omega Glory that made me see it in a way that it made me appreciate it a little more. And that is that the Omega Glory is the heart of darkness of Star Trek. Because Captain Ron Tracy is Kurtz. He's Kurtz, he Kurtzed, and certainly he's Colonel Kurtz in some ways from Apocalypse Now. So that was one thing that made me go, oh yeah, kind of is Heart of Darkness. I mean, do you see that, or am I off my rocker?
No, and I saw the comment, and I think that's part of what it is. But this is all, I think the Omega Glory is just all these missed opportunities, because if they had just done that and said, This is a guy who gets left on this planet, who's a hero in all these ways, and then we find him and he has gone mad, and like, okay, I think that's a really interesting episode. It doesn't quite explore it, but I like that idea a lot. I think it's a good explanation.
It's a great idea. The other episode, Steve. Now, this doesn't make me like Patterns of Force any more than I sort of did when we talked about it. But that was an episode that I certainly felt was problematic. I know you did too. An episode that's very, heavy-handed, beats you over the head in some ways, but because of something I read, it made me see that here's an episode of Star Trek that was filmed in 1967 that's not dealing with World War II, like, let's say, Hogan's Heroes, or even a film like The Great Escape. It's a show, an episode that's dealing with the Holocaust. And it may not have been a fully realized vision of the Holocaust, and it may have been very, very simplistic to fit into a 50-minute episode. But from something I read, it made me realize, wait a minute. For a show like Star Trek, 22 years after the Holocaust, to address the Holocaust was a pretty bold and daring thing. They didn't just do it about a Hitler figure or about conflict and war. Like, they took on genocide and the Holocaust. And at a time today, Steve, when we are seeing more and more Holocaust survivors disappear over time, at a time when we are seeing more Holocaust deniers, at a time when we are seeing more people not even know what the Holocaust was or that it even existed. But here you have a show like Star Trek, which is watched over and over and over again over the decades. And if there's an episode that'll remind people of what the Holocaust was and what happened, then I'm all for it. Flaws aside for the episode itself, I think that having an episode like Patterns of Force that is going to get watched again over the years by fans who are discovering Star Trek for the first time, and maybe it'll put something in their head about the Holocaust, and I think that's a good thing.
That's a great point, and I really love the way you said that. I still wish they had done it better.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
but I think that's a really good point. That's something that other TV really wasn't dealing with at all. So that's pretty cool. From that heavy question, I now propose a very light one, which is, there's a lot of romance in season 2 of Star Trek. Met a lot of couples, people like the Companion and Cochrane. We saw Apollo and Lieutenant Palamas. We saw Chekhov have a very romantic relationship with, I think it's Lieutenant Landon on the planet of the Apple. So my question for you, Scott, who is going to win the Cutest Couple Award from Star Trek season 2?
Well, Steve, that is a great question, and I'm glad that you came up with it because I would not have done that. But it is a great question because I have a couple of different answers to the cutest couple. And now, in terms of cutest couple, I think of like something a little more playful. But I think one of the most romantic couples is indeed Zefram Cochrane and the Companion towards the end of Metamorphosis. That moment when she holds up the scarf and she says, "I can't go with you," and he says, "I'm going to stay." And they go back to Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and he says, "Now that we have all these years together, they're going to be happy ones." It's a really beautiful moment. The way that the Companion, Hedford, is looking at Cochrane like she really loves him, and he finally realizes that he loves her. But in terms of cutest couple, I'm going to go. Are you ready? I mean, we don't see a lot of them, but there's one scene that makes me go, they're a cute couple. I'm going to go with Chekhov and Tamoon from The Gamesters.
Okay.
I mean, that one scene in the cell when she's like, sizing him up, and she's like, "That's a very nice name, Chikov," and he's like, "Chekhov." It's cute. I mean, it's brief, but they really are cute together.
I don't know. He seems a little uncomfortable with the whole thing. I'm not sure that he's a willing participant, but it is a cute scene. For me, first of all, of course, you're right. Cochrane and the companion, that is the most romantic story. It's the most fully realized love story.
Yep.
It might be the most fully realized complete love story, other than maybe City on the Edge of Forever, in all of Star Trek, the original series. I haven't thought about that a lot, but I mean, it certainly has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Absolutely. For me, the cutest couple, without question, is Gary Seven and Roberta.
Oh,
I
absolutely. Yeah.
I really like them, and because I think about what that show would be, I can see going forward in the Assignment Earth show how she's going to kind of mellow him out a little bit, and he's going to give her some direction. And of course, it's going to be a will they, won't they, multiple seasons before they finally have a first kiss and become romantic kind of a show. And I could totally see it, and I would really enjoy it. So they win cutest couple for me.
Honorable mention for cutest couple goes to two. Really quick, I'm just going to say Kirk and Kalinda in By Any Other Name. Like when she goes back, I was wondering, can you apologize to me again? And, Kirk just has that like devilish smile on his face. But the other cute couple, and I say this in a way where I don't mean romantic couple, but just in the way that these two are acting together is really cute, is Kirk and Spock in A Piece of the Action after they put on the gangster suits, and when they get in the flivver and he starts driving and Spock makes the comment, he goes, "You're an excellent starship captain, but as a taxi driver, you leave much to be desired." Kirk goes, "It was that bad?" I think, that's just great chemistry between Shatner and Nimoy.
They're fantastic. I'm going to put in one more, which is the least healthy, most codependent, terrible couple is Dr. Richard Daystrom in the M5. That is it's not a good couple.
No way. So in all of season 2, we have episodes that we love, but what about the great moments? Is there like a particular moment with our main characters that really, really stands out with you? And I'm going to start with Uhura.
With Uhura, there's no question, and it's going to be my answer for another character too. It's Uhura. It's Mirror Mirror. It's Mirror Mirror on the bridge with Sulu. Yes, she's in that unbelievable outfit, and she is so strong and so tough. And you could see Nichelle Nichols be afraid and have to overcome her fear and put on the show, and how dangerous it is. That is hands down my favorite Uhura moment.
I agree, and as my hands down my favorite Uhura episode, because she has so much to do in that episode. And you talked about Sulu. Is it also that moment where he's with her? Yeah.
Yep.
For Sulu, I think that moment is great, but I think the moment in sickbay when he shows up and he says, "Mr. Spock has orders to kill you," and he
that's good too.
It's such a great like George Takei, like you said, he was underutilized in season 2. It didn't help that he missed almost half the season, but that is his shining moment is in Mirror Mirror in these scenes. What about Chekhov?
Give some more blood, Chekhov. Have some more, take this other test, Chekhov. It's in Deadly Years. It's when he has that great monologue.
Excellent. I agree. Yeah. And then he says to Sulu, "If I live long enough, I'll run out of samples." Great moment. What about, and this is going to get a little tougher, what is your favorite Scotty moment?
Definitely tougher because he does so much in the second season, and I'm going to totally cheat, and I'm going to give you 3.
Okay.
Because I couldn't pick. For me, as Scotty the Miracle Worker, which really gets established in season 2, it's a Doomsday Machine. Is that him being the person that's going to solve all the problems that's there. For a personal moment, it's one of the few kind of heartfelt, other than Wolf in the Fold, is the moment in Mirror Mirror when he tells Kirk he's going to stay behind and he says, "Jim." That's the only time he ever calls him Jim, and it's very small, but it's really great. But I can't escape the fan favorite. I can't get away from it's green. I mean, that's the best.
First of all, that's a great point about Doomsday Machine. I mean, take your pick, the moments from Doomsday Machine. But when he's in the Jeffries tube and he's trying to fix the transporter, I mean, moment after moment for Scotty in the Doomsday Machine is great. But in terms of like another great moment, I'm going to say again in Bread and Circuses when he's on the bridge and he's gotten the order from Kirk about Condition Green, and he says, tells Chekhov to start looking for the power sources on the planet, and he says, it'll show them what a starship really can do. And he goes, "Aye, It's just a great, like, the confidence of that moment is so, so awesome.
What about we've reached Dr. McCoy? What about Dr. McCoy?
Dr. McCoy, I think if there's one standout moment, it's that's really tough. That really is tough. I mean, the moment in Amok Time when he gives Kirk the neural paralyzer. I mean, that
Yeah.
was a stroke of genius for him to fake the death. But when he's suffering from the effects of the rapid aging in the
Mm,
deadly years, and it hits him adrenaline, the adrenaline. Like
yeah.
McCoy was like he saved the day in the deadly years. And it's not the McCoy that we're used to seeing. In fact, it was hard seeing him age so rapidly like that. But even with the effects of the aging process, he's still a medical genius.
For me, it's the scene in the cell with Spock and Bread and Circuses.
Sure.
That's just it's the top of their personal relationship. It's when each one both understands something about the other and misunderstands something about the other, and it's so intense and beautifully acted. So that's my favorite McCoy moment for me.
Another sort of honorable mention McCoy moment for me is after Kirk and Spock have tried to short circuit the companion in
Mm,
Metamorphosis, and Cochrane gets the companion off of them, and Kirk recovers, and he says, "How do you fight a thing like that?" And McCoy says to Kirk, "You're a soldier so often that you forget that you're also a diplomat. Why don't you try waving a carrot in front of a stick instead of a stick?" And
that's another great one.
that's a great moment. And one final great moment is just in terms of the acting of DeForest Kelly and William Shatner is the scene in the cave in A Private Little War when McCoy is calling out Kirk for supplying the pill people with flintlocks, and they're going on and on. He says, you know, you're condemning them that will go to a war that will go on bloody year after bloody year, massacre after massacre. And Kirk just slams his fist down and says, "All right, doctor." It's a great moment for the
Yeah.
two of them. But now we get to Spock. What are your Spock moments?
It's so tough. So what I'll tell you what I wrote down, and I promise to be more specific because I wrote down all of Amok Time, all of Mirror Mirror,
Yeah, yeah.
but to be more specific, from the moment after he believes he killed Kirk, with the whole scene with T'Pring, the talking to Pow and saying, "I've killed my captain and my friend." Like it's so heartfelt and so sad. And then when he sees Kirk alive and that smile on his face,
Oh, yeah.
that is so good. To contrast that with the scene in Mirror and Mirror when it's basically him and Kirk posturing with each other, and Kirk says, "You'd find me a dangerous opponent," and when Spock says, "I hope that you realize the reverse," or "I hope
Oh,
that
it's
you're
great.
aware of the reverse." That is a fantastic moment. And my last one, again, it could be any moment in the last active piece of the action. But man, when he puts his feet up on the desk,
Yeah.
I just love it. I love it. How
You
about you?
know, first of all, you're right. Take your pick from a mock time, but that moment when Kirk walks through, he says, "You know, instruct Scotty to take command of the Enterprise." And Kirk says, "Don't you think you better check with me first?" And he goes, "Captain," and he swings Kirk around. He goes, "Jim!" It's such a great moment.
Yeah.
It's such an iconic moment, and it was shocking to me when we were doing our deep dive of a mock time that Leonard Nimoy actually had reservations about filming that scene. Like he thought that Spock should have smiled in private, not in front of Kirk. But the other, uh, overall, I have to say, is Spock in command of the Enterprise in Who Mourns for Adonias. The
Mm,
reason is look at Spock's first command in the Galileo 7, how he was out of his element. He had no idea what he was doing, and he just made a lot of wrong decisions. The growth of Spock from the Galileo 7 to Who Mourns for Adonais when he's on the bridge and he's saying, "I want to know what's going on down there." And Uhura is trying to fix the communication circuits. And he is giving her positive reinforcement, telling her, "I can think
mm.
of nobody better equipped than you, Miss Uhura. Please proceed." Like this is a character who grew, who evolved, and he makes such a great commander in Who Mourns for Adonais.
Absolutely. Great, great point. All right. We've reached the big guy,
Let's hear it.
Captain
You go
Kirk.
first. Yes.
Okay, I'll go first. Okay. Uh, First of all, again, I love Shatner in A Piece of the Action. So, in terms of comedy, in terms of seeing him, William Shatner, have fun, the whole speech of the Federation's moving in, we're taking over, that whole thing as he's
Yeah.
just strutting his gangster stuff, I think is hilarious and awesome. And it's a joy to me to watch. But I'm going to go with, I just got to go with the two speeches. So I got to go with the end of Mirror Mirror and him convincing Mirror Spock to take over the Enterprise, and Risk is Our Business. You can't beat Risk is Our Business. Those are my moments.
Those are my most true moments as well. I have speech to Spock and Mirror Mirror, and then quote unquote Risk is Our Business. Those are my top two Kirk moments. I'm going to add to that the Fizbin scene.
Fizbin's great.
Fizbin is great, and that is just Shatner really, really leaning into a comedic strength that he did not get credit for at that time. I love my favorite Kirk moment. I love the scenes in A Metamorphosis when Kirk is trying to reason with a companion, but I think I love it more because of just Shatner's performance. He was just so great in that episode and that scene in particular. But Steve, the moment when the Romulans are attacking the Enterprise, which has ventured into the neutral zone, and Commodore Stalker is out of his element, and Chekhov and Uhura and Sulu are turning to him looking for orders. What do we do? And in walks a young and back to his prime Captain Kirk on the bridge, and he's giving orders left and right. He is cool as a cucumber. He is strutting his stuff. He is totally confident, and you see Chekhov and Sulu and Uhura just looking at him with smiles of relief. You go, that's our guy. That's my captain. That's the moment for me.
It's great. Yeah, absolutely. It's a triumphant moment. Scott, for you, what was the most thrilling moment in season 2 of Star Trek?
Wow. Well, because season 2 really just to me is the peak Star Trek, there are so many great moments that I got to say, after all these years, all these decades, I still watch them and they still keep me on the edge of my seat. And number one, because I got a couple, number one on that list is the scene where Kirk is on the Constellation at the end of the Doomsday Machine, and the transporter keeps shorting out. And Kirk is like, gentlemen, I suggest you beam me aboard. And Sulu was counting down the seconds, and the planet killer is getting closer. And you see the Constellation enter the mouth of the planet killer. And try it now, Mr. Kyle. They beam him aboard, and he's healthy, and he runs to the bridge. It's so great because it's edge of your seat stuff. But then when he beams back aboard the Enterprise, it's a rousing moment. It's such an uplifting moment. It's so great. That's number one for me. What's number one for you?
That's mine, hands down. Same thing. I think it is the tightest, most well put together build to a climax in all of the original series. I think it is so well done. That is hands down most thrilling moment of season 2.
Absolutely. I think that the whole episode is cinematic. Like, you could show the Doomsday Machine in a movie theater, and I would pay to see it. The other moment for me that I feel like is really thrilling is towards the end of Bread and Circuses, when Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are fighting the Roman guards with their swords, and Merrick flips open the communicator, Enterprise emergency beam up, and the proconsul just like stabs him. And then like you see him like yank his knife out with the blood on his knife. And the way he throws the communicator into the cell, it's like this half smile. He's doing everything he can to show some kind of a smile of redemption for himself. And you just see the transporter beam Kirk, Spock, and McCoy up, and they're firing their machine guns. And it's just like, talk about a nick of time moment. One final third honorable mention in terms of thrilling moments is in the middle of By Any Other Name, when the Enterprise is approaching the barrier at the edge of the galaxy.
That's a good one too.
Kirk and Spock and Scotty's got his finger on the button to open up the and flood the engines with antimatter, and Kirk is just sitting in his chair like, holy cow, what do I do? And it's just so funny how the episode turns into something completely different, like within moments after that scene.
What moment in season 2 moved you the most?
That is an easy one. It is going to come as no surprise to everyone listening to our season 2 wrap that my favorite episode of season 2, if not Star Trek itself, is Metamorphosis. And the scene in Metamorphosis when Nancy Hedford, who's now been resurrected by the companion, holds up her scarf and she sees Cochrane through the scarf. It is such a beautiful moment. She says, "I can't go with you," and the score, the music that plays under that scene, the music is composed by George Dunning. It is so deeply beautiful that it always gets me emotional to the brink of tears, no matter how many times I watch it. I posted that scene on our Facebook page, Steve, Enterprise Incidents Facebook page, and I got a lot of similar reactions from people who really are like, "What a beautiful moment." What's your most moving moment?
There's no question, nothing hit me harder. And partially it's because I'm, in my 50s now and have had family who have grown older and I've watched people decline. Kirk on Trial in the Deadly Years is so painful and played so well. And you watching him try to put up the front and hold down his insecurity and watching him try to convince people that he's capable when he's not. And to have that scene and then following up on it when he rejects Spock, and
Oh,
Spock,
yeah.
it's just so brutal. These people, this is the, most important relationships they have. And at this moment they're falling apart. That really wrecked me.
Oh, that's a great moment. Oh, yeah. The pain look on Spock's face when Kirk is like, "Get out of here. You stab me in the back." Oh, you're right. You're right. That is a really moving scene. And speaking of Metamorphosis, I got to say, when we were doing our deep dive with Ralph Sinensky and he read back a quote from something I said about that episode, like, I don't know,
Yeah,
5 or 6 years ago,
pretty great.
like that just meant the world to me that the director of my favorite episode remembered and thought enough to read back my own quote about it. But speaking of an episode he did direct, Return to Tomorrow, at the end of that episode, when Sargon and Thalassa have one final moment before they are cast to oblivion, it's a very moving moment. And
Yep.
again, the score by George Dunning is also very effective in that episode as well.
That's a great one. Where do you feel we've talked about all the things we love about season 2. We talked about these great themes, wonderful moments, great character moments, thrilling episodes, moving episodes. Where did season 2 miss it? Where did season 2 go wrong for you?
Okay, well, behind the scenes, where season 2 went wrong was Gene Roddenberry letting go of Gene Kuhn.
Yeah.
That was a big mistake. That was where season 2 went wrong. But I just think that in the second half of the season, after the filming of Bread and Circuses, you started getting, Omega Gory and Piece of the Action and Patterns of Force. The parallel Earth trope just got to be too much. And as much as I give Star Trek a free pass on things that I don't like because I just love the show so much and I love the characters so much, it did get to be a bit much. I think that's really the only downfall of season 2 is the reliance on the parallel Earth trope.
So that's the big one for me. I'll give you a couple of small ones because I want to talk about the parallel Earth one, but a couple of small ones is things like talking to computers and getting them to self-destruct. It's like these things that got used over and over again. There's so many, particularly in the second half of season 2, of we're captured, we escape, we're captured, we escape, and not necessarily having the most creative ways for us to escape. Like there's just a lot where you could see that they were running out of ideas, and so that one bothered. The parallel Earth one, that's 100% the worst thing about season 2. And what bums me out about it is I just think they got it wrong, because then what happens is in later Star Trek is like, well, we can't do a parallel Earth because that got really stupid in the old Star Trek. Is what they did was they said it's exactly the same. Not only is it like Rome, but they have the same god names, the same history, that like all of it is the same. It's not just that they're kind of like Nazis, it's that they are Nazis. It's not just that they're kind of like America, but they have the same flag, they have the same constitution, and so what happens is that becomes what the episode's about. oh my God, what a crazy coincidence that halfway across the galaxy, we found a planet exactly like us. Instead of exploring it thematically. Now, it's not one of my favorite episodes, but Miri is an episode where we go to a planet that's similar to Earth, that dealt with a thing that we could deal with but haven't. That's where the parallel Earth thing could be really good, is because it allows you to explore an idea of what happens if we have nuclear war. How do we deal with, all of the issues that we face, race and gender and, all these things, and explore it from a different angle. It's not doing it exactly the same. It's doing it that it's similar, that they face similar struggles. That would have been really good. But having that American flag come out, it's just like, well, this is just stupid.
Yeah,
At a
and
certain
it all
point.
happened really, really fast, like one after the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. But overall, let's face it, season 2 of Star Trek was absolutely brilliant. And the conversations that we had on season 2 on Enterprise incidents are just like Star Trek was hitting its stride in season 2, I feel like Enterprise incidents hit its stride in season 2. So, we have been very lucky in the sense that we've had listeners find us over the course of that while we've been recording Enterprise incidents. But where where can people go to really support us? Because as much as we love doing all this work, it is work. So how can enterprisers support enterprise incidents?
Ooh, Enterprisers. Is that their name now? Is that the official designation?
That is a
Oh, I like it.
hashtag. Yes, enterprisers.
All right. Well, you enterprisers out there, all you have to do is look at the show notes, and every single podcast app where you listen this through, you can see the notes with the description of the show. And the first thing listed under the description is a link where you can click on it. It'll take you to Anchor, our host's website, and there you can subscribe to Enterprise Incidents for as little as 99 cents a month. It is a huge, huge help to us. We like to think of it as a tip jar. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe to it. It really helps us out.
And make sure you head to our Facebook page and like and follow us on Facebook, because we have a lot of fun with our Facebook page. We really engage with our listeners. We ask really good questions. You'll be the first to hear about breaking news about our next episode and special guests for our next episode. We've had really engaging conversations and questions that we brought up that a lot of the fans really seem to enjoy engaging on. So head to our Facebook page, which is Enterprise Incidents. You can follow us on Twitter at Enter Incidents, and you can follow us on Instagram at Enterprise Incidents. And Steve, where can people follow you on social media?
SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. And since we've just done kind of a recap of the season, well, on my other podcast, The Cinephiles, which is CINE-FILES, we do deep dives like we do on Enterprise Incidents, but every month we do a live show, and our live shows are sometimes more casual conversations about broader events, one of which was our recap of the year in film of 2021, where my good friend Scott Mance appeared. And then just a week ago, we revisited all of the forgotten comedies of the 80s. So if you care about 80s comedies, there is a live Cinephile show for you to check out.
Did you talk about the King of Comedy?
We did talk about the King of Comedy.
Okay.
The most disturbing, difficult comedy. It's to me, that one is comedy adjacent. I mean, it's comedy. It's funny, but it's rough. We talked about everything from Back to School to Dragnet to Dr. Detroit to Better Off Dead, Say Anything. We must have talked about 80 different comedies.
Oh, that's so great. That's so great. As long as you
really
talked
fun.
about the King of Comedy, that's one of my favorite comedies ever. But you're right, it is comedy adjacent. And make sure you follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Movie Mance. So this conversation, Steve, our season 2 wrap up, really does wrap up our entire conversation about season 2 of Enterprise Incidents. So, if you were not a fan, if you didn't know a lot about the history of Star Trek, you'd be like, wow, from season 1 to season 2, wow, Star Trek got really, really great. It's got to keep getting better, right? Well, not exactly. And even though, Steve, I'm going to miss deep dive conversations on all-time iconic classics like A Mock Time and Mirror Mirror and The Doomsday Machine and Journey to Babel, I actually think when we get into our deep dives of the 3rd season, particularly episodes like "And the Children Shall Lead" and "Spock's Brain" and "The Way to Eden." I mean,
Mhm.
I think our most interesting conversations have been on the episodes that were not that great. And I'm looking at you, Alternative Factor. But before we dive into season 3, we're going to prep and gear up for season 3. So that is the focus of our next episode, our season 3 preview. Season 3 begins with our preview of season 3 on the next episode of Enterprise Incidents. So join us. And until then, keep going boldly.